Salutations everyone in person and over the live stream for this Houston Public Library author talk and reading with, of course, the Houston Poet Laureate, Reyes Ramirez. I am Kwang Vo, Public Poetry's director, but today I get to once again play host, and I have the privilege, of course, not only of celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, but also the privilege of being at Stanaker Neighborhood Library, named after Nina Stanaker, who was a former precinct judge, was on HPO's board, and who advocated for this area of town, who advocated for amenities and opportunities, including the building of this library. So it's a tremendous opportunity to be here. Before Reyes has a chance to read, you'll permit me to read a short bio. If you want to see his full bio, which is, full of accolades, I highly recommend his website, reyesramirez.com. But Reyes Ramirez is, of course, the 2025-2027 Houston Poet Laureate, as well as a writer, educator, curator, translator, and organizer of Mexican and Salvadoran descent. He authored the short story collection, The Book of Wonders, 2022, and a 2023 Young Lions Fiction Award finalist from the University of Arizona Press, Camino de Sol series. The poetry collection, Rey of Gold Teeth, 2023, from Hub City Press, a finalist for the 2024 Texas Institute of Letters Award for Best First Book of Poetry, and Cerveza Songs, Houston, Texas, 2024, a collection of craft beer, poetry, reviews, and photography that is an honor winner for the Fred Whitehead Award for Best Design of a Trade Book. I also want to mention that he uses works in contemporary Houston arts, literature, and history and politics, and he has been honored as the winner of the 2025 Anne Fragment Translation Prize from the Hawkins Review, as well as the 2020 Canto Mundo Fellow, and receives awards from BIPOC Arts Network and Funds, Houston Arts Alliance, Poets and Writers, and the Warhol Foundation. Idea Fund. Quite a few things, again, just a selection of the many, just a small selection of the many accolades. But I just, with this in mind, being Hispanic Heritage Month, I just want to ask your feeling about celebrating this month now as Houston Poet Laureate.
Yes, well, first, thank you, Mom, for being here, for facilitating this discussion. I want to thank Justin, who's setting up the live stream, who set up the live stream and the reading. So shout out to him. Shout out to the Stanaker Library for hosting this discussion. Shout out to y'all in the audience. Thank you so much for being here. But yeah, to answer the question, so this is actually, so I'm the current Houston Poet Laureate, and this is actually my third time going for it. I was a finalist 2 times before. I didn't get it. But that's the thing, it's like Houston is full of so many amazing poets that it's like, really like, there's never a wrong choice. And so, now that it's led up to this moment where I am now the current Houston Poet Laureate, that we're definitely in a different time that I was those 2 other times. And I think each time that I was, now looking back, I'm like, oh, those times of rejection were preparing me for this moment, where we're in a discussion of what are, in a reference to the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx community, and what our contributions are to the society, which is being questioned in many ways. And so for me to now be the Houston Poet Laureate, and to now be doing many events like this throughout this month, I think it's my duty and it's my privilege to share our contributions to society as a community, that no one can tell us any different, that we've contributed, we've built, and we've given great contributions to the society and the way it runs and the way that it's been innovated. And so for me, it's my job as Poet Laureate of Houston to sing of those accomplishments, to sing of our contributions. And so I do that every month. And fortunately, like Houston is full of so many amazing poets and events that I can't possibly go to all of them. I'm doing about 4, maybe 5. We'll see how I feel in a minute. But events today, and that's still like not all of them. And,
Yes.
I don't get to go to every event that I'm invited to, and to just have the privilege and honor of like representing Houston, representing my community on a larger scale as part of this community. It's an immense honor, and I'll never stop singing about it. I'll never stop talking about it, and my poetry, my work is all in service to that, to representing Houston, to representing my community, and to really just say that no one can tell us different.
Before you share some of your poems with the audience as well as those over the live stream, you have a series of poems, which I like here, in your book on historic Latinx idols and figures. And could you tell us how you selected these individuals? Because there's myriad Latinx figures, right, who you probably grew up with. And kind of how did this project come about, and why did you pick these figures?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so growing up, I'm of Mexican and Salvadoran descent. And as the son of immigrants, we didn't really have like a lot of, I at least didn't have a lot of foreknowledge of what it meant to be American. I had to learn it on my own. And my mom was, from Mexico. She was learning it on her own terms, right? And my dad was learning it on his own terms. And me, I had to learn on my own with them, or even in ways that contradict what their ideas and what they had to face. And so I had to do research, and unfortunately, in my education, I was not really educated on figures that people like me and our contributions to society and to history. And so as I came to be a poet, I wanted to put myself in conversation with the people who made great contributions to the society. And so I did research, and so there are the people that we just commonly know, and there are the people who are lesser known. As a poet, as a researcher, as someone who cares about this history, I did deeper dives to see like who aren't we talking about, who have made like these immense contributions. And so I picked a lot of the figures that maybe are more like pop culture that we all know, and there are some that maybe we don't know. And I wanted to put them all in conversation with each other, because we all contribute to society in our own way. It's whether or not what is remembered or what isn't. And so I picked a lot of these figures based on that. And overall, it's in this collection of my first collection of poetry, the Rey of Gold Teeth, where I then put in conversation with people like my mom and my dad or my sister, or just everyday happenings in Houston. And that's because that's my experience, is that all is happening at the same time. And so, yeah. So I'll do a quick presentation, and then I'll read 2 poems. Kind of in that series, so the first 2, this is actually here in this neighborhood, the East End. It's on Telephone Road, this mural. And growing up, I did learn a lot about Pancho Villa and, why is his name, Emiliano Zapata, who gave me a lot of ideas of like what revolutionary and radical thought can look like through action. Next, please. Yeah, so one of the poems that I have is obviously one of the better known, contributors to American arts, Selena Quintanilla. As a Houstonian, I would be silly to not include a poem about her in this series as a Houstonian. So I'm going to read that poem. It's not super long, so I'm going to read 2, but this is the first of those 2. Selena's last concert in Houston. I looked up at the TV, childlike eyes electric bright from Selena's jumpsuit, pulled from the purple cosmos, which shimmered across her great cuerpo of curves, the arc of the universe bending to the whim of a Chicana. Every organ piled in my belly, I felt the weight of my existence burdened with potential or defeat, disgrace or love rumbling enough to bring me to my knees in prayer or mercy, dazed in awe or reverence as she sang Flor, then composed one out of the black air with her hand, as though casting with bendiciones. She will soon receive a gunshot in her shoulder, infinite potential spilling like water out of a tipped pitcher. Whatever beauty there is, they want it for themselves, oh so scary fast. We shouldn't fear what's greater than us, lest we never leave our bodies, because at 23, Selena sang into a void and demanded a response. Left hand across her breasts, breathing in through a smiling boca, pulses of screaming amor. For a moment of eternity, she looked into the camera through her bangs, disordered by wild performance at me, alone, just sitting there, draped with a blanket in the shadow dancing living room of my mom's apartment. Yeah, so that's one. That's the legendary Astrodome performance. Next. Another person that I wrote a poem about is Rosemary Casals. So if you don't know who she is a tennis player, Salvadoran American, and her contribution was that out of her contemporaries, she was one of the, if not the highest paid female tennis player of her time. And during that time, there were a lot of female tennis players who were advocating for equal pay, and so you'll have figures like Billie Jean King, who were perhaps more of the more well-known figures in that movement, but Rosemary Casals is actually there as well, and actually another major player in that movement to get women equal pay in sports. And so she's one of the lesser-known figures in that movement, and so I wanted definitely to give her flowers and write a poem. So this is the second of the two that I'll be reading. So this is Answers Without Questions for Rosemary Casals. I had no idols. Think. At a dinner table, a blue bowl reflects your face as a drowning angel. Stomach screams speaking, do you think about rosemary crust of roasted chicken, crackling between your teeth and wait for someone to deliver this fantasy? No. You leave and prepare a feast from your ambitions. There's no such thing as strength, just what survives restraint. Why don't you ask a caged Motmot about the possibilities of his turquoise wings? The impossibilities of the pendulous black rackets at tail's end? To answer your question, it's my movement in overhead, how I'm seen yet inconceivable, how I smack a ball into its fate, respectively. I can prevaricate with words like dedication, heart, and discipline, but truly, it takes everything. A willingness to be inspected like a crime scene, able to answer someone calmly when they ask if you belong here, the desire to transform the tennis ball into a whirling sun, and being ready for all of it to never be enough. No one memory ever defines a life. That's like seeing one frame to experience a film. When you think about it, death is when an object or moment or person is removed of its story. Sans history and future, a thing is just a thing, an heirloom with no heir. Let me put it this way, I've lost everything, but won everything as well. Really, I'm everything in its loss, the loss at everything's return. If you're about it, you always want to play the best. If I could play against God, then I'd play against God. Not that I'm foolish enough to think I could beat God, but I just want to know how God would play, how potent the serves would be, how the ball would exist outside the bounds of time and space, how even God will respect that what they give, I will return, and what I give, they will accept. Thank you. And so I wrote that one because I watched interviews with her, and she has like a very like confident and dry response to questions, and so I'm like, that's amazing. And so,
if you permit me to say something, there's often times when we talk about our idols or literary heroes, etc., people we admire, we pedestalize them. And yet I find in your poems, even as you're talking about these very remarkable individuals, you're talking about not just aspects of their career, but also very human reflections on them. And yeah, you're not putting them on a pedestal. You're turning them into a kind of conversation as though they're sitting next to you. And yeah, that's a very interesting quality. Was that something that you seek to do with these figures, to make them a bit more approachable? Or did that just come naturally as you were listening to these interviews, watching the performances?
Thank you. Yeah. So in my research, I was finding a lot of figures, and there were so many figures that I couldn't fit into the collection. And there's some that are not good contributors to history. And I think for me, in exploring that complexity, which I'll get to in some of the other figures featured, but sometimes what I would do in the research is I'd be full of so much pride and love, but then as I got either to some circumstances where what ultimately happened to them or how they were treated during their time, I also felt sadness and grief. And so for me, I wanted to explore that human element of yeah, like you say, we put these people on a pedestal, we put our heroes, almost elevate them to like non-human status, but to me, they're humans, and that's what makes them amazing, is that they were humans. They knew the risks, they knew the dangers of being heroes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes a hero. So if we want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is George Melendez Wright. He is a Salvadoran American biologist and park ranger. I believe he was operating between the 1920s and 30s. And so he was actually a park ranger during the early days of the national park system of the United States. And he would actually be one of the main people who literally wrote the book and standards of how to treat natural ecosystems in these park systems. And so, yeah, I just think that's like an amazing contributor to human history and to U.S. history that is generally, again, not talked about. He died very young. He died in a car accident while he was on the way to, let me see, I'm not gonna read the poem, it's kind of a longer poem, but he died on the way to a site in a car crash. But he is, yeah, he's a remarkable figure. What page is he on? Yeah, so he died in 1936, very young. But yeah, he, for example, during the early days of the park system, the US park system, you could just go up to bears and feed them, or go up to trees and rocks and just like mark them up and stuff like that. And so he would be the one that wrote the rules. He'd be like, you can't do this, or you can't do this, or this is how you preserve this. He also saved the surf bird from extinction as well. So a great contributor to human history and US history. Next. This is Jose M. Hernandez. He is probably more better known. I think a film was just made about him. But he is the first Mexican-American astronaut. And what really drew me to him is that I attended a speech he gave. And he said that when he was in space, he looked down at the Earth and he saw that there were no borders. And so for me, what a man qualified to say that. He is the son of migrant farm workers, and he's an astronaut. And so the poem that I have in here about him explores that journey of like, how do you go from like working with dirt to being in the cosmos? And so I wanted to explore that journey as someone. It's one of the very few human beings who's ever been able to do that. Next. So there's actually a street nearby named after this person, this figure, Houstonian, Margario Garcia. He was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He fought in World War II, and he was actually the first immigrant in U.S. history to receive the Medal of Honor. And he did it by fighting fascism. He did it by killing Nazis in World War II. And so, again, an amazing figure. And this is one of those figures that I felt immense pride and love. But when you find out that he came back to Houston after he received his Medal of Honor, after fighting fascism in Germany and abroad in Europe, he would actually be the victim of a hate crime here in Houston. And so it's kind of like, you know, that is kind of the pride, but then I also had that immediate grief afterwards. And so the poem that I have for him is like a 6-part poem that explores different parts of U.S. history with that in mind. It's like moments of extreme pride and moments of extreme grief. And so,
was there, I know you mentioned it's a 6-part, but was there any particular part you would like to share from this? Given his, Mr. Garcia's connection to Houston, but also the rather ironic twist in his biography.
Absolutely. Let's see. I'll read. All right. So it's kind of like one of those, I call them jellyfish poems, where it's like there's one title, but then like each part of the poem has its own little mini title.
Sure.
But the overall title is, "In the 6 Killings of Nazis by Margario Garcia, there is a lineage." 1944. Híjole. Look at these machines you've built for my annihilation. Air-cooled, belt-fed, open bolt, recoil operated, steel alloyed, 1,200 rounds a minute. They are made well, but not like me. Please let some kind of record show. The blonde skin of gringos is pierced by bullet like child fingers through cold lard. Astounding how those with piel tan débil try so hard to convince me it isn't. In Texas, Signs say no dogs, no blacks, no Mexicans allowed. In Germany, you speak of some master race. I've not seen a body more accepting of holes. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, very, yeah. And again, that's one of those moments where it's like hell yeah, you know, like, yeah, you fight fascism, but then like, yeah, as you go along the poem, there's other moments of
that contrast between the cold mentality, technology progress versus our own kind of human frailty, softness. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, thank you. Yeah, next. Again, perhaps another more well-known, Eddie Guerrero, pro wrestler from San Antonio, or El Paso, I believe it's El Paso, but fellow Texan otherwise. Considered one of the greatest pro wrestlers of all time. He actually comes from a dynasty of pro wrestlers. His father, I believe, I forget his first name, but also Guerrero, but he was seen as the grandfather of Lucha Libre in Mexico. And so when he came to America, he brought that tradition with him and created one of the greatest pro wrestlers of all time. Yeah, so there's a poem dedicated to him. And I think, for me, it was important to write that poem because, again, he's part of a dynasty of of this craft. And so you'll see that a lot of communities of color, they'll have like these dynasties of excellence, but in like industries or things that are usually not as seen as seriously, right? And so like The Rock, for example, is a member of a very prestigious Samoan wrestling dynasty. And the Guerreros formed, they're like kind of the Mexican-American kind of equivalent to that of like this dynasty of like the people who are the best at their craft. And I think that's also important to kind of recognize is that we also have legacies and dynasties of excellence. Next, please. And so the last ones to talk about today is the Fabulous Wonder Twins. They are Salvadoran American drag queens who escaped the Salvadoran Civil War to New York, and they would actually form part of like that club culture that I think they're called Culture Kids. And so throughout the 90s, there's a series of poems that focus on them and their outfits, because they would wear very, the pomp of these outfits, they're very unique and they're twins. And so there would always be two of them in matching outfits. And so there's a series of poems that discuss their outfits, but it's in the context of music videos throughout the 90s. Because there are like all kinds of music videos in the 90s, but maybe for like 3 seconds. And it's kind of like, for me, I was astounded by like how they were so part of the zeitgeist at the time, but for small moments at a time. And so I guess the contemporaries at the time would be like RuPaul and stuff like that. And so yeah, it was always interesting to me how there are figures like us kind of in the background, but still marking the movement, still like putting a voice to it, giving it form and shape. So yeah, and that's it, I believe so. Yeah, so thank you so much. So there's a poem or a series of poems for each of those figures in the collection. Yeah, thank you.
Before I ask if the audience has any questions, were there, because I know you had to go through each of those figures, was there any particular section or poem that you would like to share to kind of related to any of those figures that you did get to know?
Oh, sure. Let's do.
Your excitement is palpable, and so I don't want to take that away from all the poetry.
No worries. Let's see. Let's do. I guess I'll do the Jose. I'll read a section of the poem Jose and then this poem. Because that one is also like what I call the jellyfish poem. There's a main title, but then there's sections with their own little titles. So this poem is titled, the main title is The First Mexican-American Astronaut Was Once. The first Mexican-American astronaut was once on TV as another version of himself. A white line fattens at the television's belly that enunciates half words when struck on the side and garbles with a mouthful of ants swarming on steel wool, but he's there on that cauliflower moon, the astronaut who reminds me of me. The astronaut's face collapses on itself like a dying spider's dying limbs. I skew the antenna's arms until there's a man thousands of miles outside my planet in the TV. The sole thing closer to the situation is the moon itself. I can see my apparition years from now through its spit hole in the jet fuel sky. When no one believes me, I cry so hard I'm hiccups in a boy suit. To feel the moon's cheek on my bare skin, I stretch rabbit ears to their limit, while a facsimile of a man stepping off an alloyed craft onto platano meat develops upside down. I'm qualified to be led by my ambitions. Before bed, I ask, "You ready for me up there, Gordo?" The moon winks. Its iris is my thumbprint. The first Mexican-American astronaut was once on another planet with another species. Here they worship water, its ability to fit any container, how each drop is its own conscious, the way it wads up, dances, and vapors off a hot skillet. When someone cries, there's a bottling ritual to repurpose the tears, sobs of sadness for cooking, weeps of happiness to anoint. I teach them the words water, agua, H2O. They teach me to draw symbols on my arms with water and study their evaporation, their form of prayer. They build glass monuments, glass cathedrals, glass sculptures, glass symbols on glass walls and glass homes, and fill each structure with water. Every so often, they'll destroy them, melt the shards down, and build them anew to be filled with more water, as per scripture that must be constantly be rewritten on sheets of scalding iron with water that nourishes on impact. They were horrified to learn that our vast rivers of speaking water act as borders, which I explained were artificial designations of geopolitics based on the results of historical events. They tell me doom awaits such a people, and explain how they place their most esteemed dead in a coffin of ice, pushed down a river that empties into an ocean. I'm too tired to explain the rest.
Earlier you had a thought which stayed with me, and that was, when you're writing these poems about these figures, these very well-known figures, you had them also kind of in conversation with those around you. You mentioned your mother and yourself. Maybe not in conversation as you saw aspects of them reflected in your surroundings and vice versa. Do you have a poem that kind of made this connection between one of these figures and your immediate surroundings?
Yeah, let's see. So there's another series of poems in here that's from the voice of a mother, of a matriarch, and throughout the book there's 10 of these poems, and so each has been part kind of a different wisdom or an advice. Some not so good, some pretty amazing, and again it kind of reflects that idea of like what is salvageable, right? What was done before you even existed, and so how do you impart that knowledge to people who don't have that reference? And so like there's some things that you keep, there's some things where it's like, nah, maybe that should stay with that generation, you know, like, and so for me, some of these poems do kind of reflect that of what to keep and what to take. If you don't mind for me. Sure. All right. 3. Hijo, please. Vete a la tienda. Cómprame esas tarjetitas to call your tías, tus tíos. Dísele al señor, señor, quiero tarjetas para llamar mis tíos, mis tías en México. Quick, please. No sales así. Try to look presentable, like you have a madre that buys you clothes. Te lo juro, God is a mother. Who else loves what grows to forget you? If there's cambio, no seas malo. Baila viejita que reza porfa something dulce. Qué cruel la vida es. Mijo, tienes que ser buena gente. When you marry, love your wife. Kiss her hands every night antes de dormir. You never know. Ama tu gente. Be kind or Diosito will make you kind. Yeah.
I love that question. What is salvageable? What is salvageable? And in your kind of poetic exploration of these idols and your immediate surroundings, what did you find? What was one thing, or maybe two, that you did find that was salvageable?
That was?
Yeah, that was.
I mean, I think there was more to be salvaged than not. I think like, but that's the thing. It's like for things to be salvageable is that you have to find them, right? You have to have them, and you have to understand them, and you have to understand yourself, right? Like how do you know to keep something if you don't know what it is, right? And I think sometimes there are moments where you do have to keep things that you don't know what they are yet. You know, I'm sure you've all had that moment where someone gives you a piece of advice and you're like, whatever. And then later something happens, you're like, oh, that's why they told me that. You know, maybe that's why they told me that, hang out over there, or something like that. And so for me, there are still moments where, in looking at these figures, for example, at the time, like the George Melendez Wright poem, for a moment, again, it was that moment of like pride, of being like, wow, I really did make these contributions and all that great stuff. But then, and then as time went on, I thought more and more about it. As I looked into like prepare myself to write the poem, I was like, oh, but he died very young, and ultimately, like, this is before, you know, the United States helped fund and perpetuate the Salvadoran Civil War. And so it's like, you know, you give and you give, but then what do you get in return? And so ultimately, what is the lesson there? You know, I think I'm still learning that lesson. Like, what is the contributions that we provide? What do we get in return?
You're saying it's hitting very close to home. Recently, I had to ask my mother for some very personal advice, and she's like, you know, it's been a while since you've come to me. So yeah, I was like, oh yeah, about that. Because turning inward is hard. It's more difficult to kind of project outwards. But I find that in these, it's interesting because you went outwards to find your identity or history. And yet they kind of led you back home, as it were, right?
Yeah, and I think when you start to see, when you, again, as earlier, it's like when you maintain these heroes as human beings, you start to see that they struggled, they had their own problems, they had their own shortcomings, but they did it in spite of those things. And I think that's what makes us all capable of being heroes, of being active participants in history rather than because we make them into like just above human, right? And it's kind of like, and we don't see ourselves as able to do those things. When it's the opposite, we're all capable of doing those things. It's just we chose to remember these. And so, how do you remember your family members? How do you remember your contributors to your history? To me, those are just as important.
Would you read another poem from the series of the kind of matriarchal background to kind of tie that point in of a lesson or something that you realize?
Sure, thank you. Let's do. All right, let's go. You know, it's hard to pick. There's like 10 of these. So let's do. I read one. All right, here you go. 6. Hijo, please. ¿Estás enojado for calling you feo? Pues, madres have to be honest. I can tell you, you're so perfect and beautiful, but I'd be a liar. How can I give you to the world if you don't know how it's going to treat you? I cannot teach my son to die afraid. Óigame. You give a flower too much water, y se muere. You give your heart to someone, y they disappear. You give everything of yourself, hasta que te mata, y se olvidan. If you love somebody, you can accept the little cruelties. If you can't do it for me, then who? Ni feo, ni gordo, ni vida. Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, with about 20 minutes left, I want to open it up to, of course, our audience here to see if they have any questions. And of course, it doesn't have to be necessarily just about the individuals you covered or just about those poems that you read, but aspects of poetry and of your role as well, because we're all curious about you. So, audience, did anyone have any questions for Reyes? Feel free to ask.
What was the beginning phase of the visions that you started to get and see for creating the book of poetry? Like, what was the start of it that you're like, you know, really pulling from this and pulling from that? Because this is so, like, very distinctive. It's very, obviously, you have the culture component, but the way that you, like, speak of them, speak to them, speak with them, I mean, the connection is just very, very different and very just precise to, you know, a really strong vision or connection that you were
you. What's your name?
Tracy?
Tracy, thank you, Tracy. I mean, the book itself, I considered myself a poet first, and then along the way, I think I just finished a book of short stories first, and then that got published first, and then a year after this book was published, and that's because in that time I was submitting my book of fiction. I had already finished my book of poetry, and so the way that came about, so at that time, I guess at that point in my life, I'd been writing for about maybe like 7 or 8 years. And so I had poems that I've written throughout that time. And I think whenever, as a poet, you embark on like a collection or something, like finite, because there's the practice of your life, right? You might write poems throughout your life, and they may not be connected at all, and they're just for those moments and for what you needed at the time. But then when you sit down to be like, this is going to be a book, you start to kind of then think about what conversations the poems are having with each other throughout the expanse of your practice. And so for me, I think what I wanted this first book is it is my first book of poetry. I had a mentor at the time. I don't know if you've heard of him, Ray. If you haven't, you should. His name is Eduardo C. Corral, who I grew up reading. I read him in college when I was like a young baby poet, and so like he gave me a great frame of reference to which work from. And what astounded me about his poetry was that it was so unapologetic in how it played with languages and forms. And so for me, I'm like, I want to do that. And so I was lucky enough to finally get in contact with him. And he mentored me on this first book. And so I gave him my first draft of the book, and he was like, he would give me moments of like, no, you gotta push it further. And so for me, he gave me that reference to be like, yeah, like, what does it mean to be a poet? Like, to push the language as far as it can go. And sometimes you have to be hard on the language. You have to be hard on your own language and what you know. And so for me, in putting this book together, I wanted to explore as many language, in terms of language and structure, I tried to explore as much as possible the expanse. And so throughout my collection and my practice at the time, throughout my career, I pulled together poems and I would take them and be like, how do I push this even further? And he gave me a great piece of advice, which was put the words in different containers, right? And so if you wrote it as one thing, try putting it in a different container. And so for me, like, I had all these thoughts, and I'm like, oh, now, so this is water, so now I have to pick the glass, right? Is it glass? Is it a mug? Is it a can? Is it a paint?
Literal containers.
Well, it's metaphorical, I suppose. It's like, if the words are water, right, then it's kind of the form is the cup.
Sure.
And so, like, how do you change them, right? Because the water will fill the container. It's just what is the container going to do to the water, right? And so, for me, then I was finding myself like doing a lot of like series poems, right? Where it's like I have a series about just walking around in Houston. I have a series that are focused on the historical figures. I have a series that focuses on the matriarchal voice. And I have a series that's on the patriarchal. I have a series, and then I started to find that like, oh, they're even now more in conversation with each other, because I have a series of poems about the fabulous Wonder Twins, but then I also have a series of poems about my sister, right? My relation with my sister, and so we start to get into like siblinghood and throughout history, but also in the moment. And so for me, that's what helped me put this together was how are they in conversation with each other and how are they not? Because then I have a series of poems that I grew up a little bit in Galveston, and so there's a series of poems about Galveston, and I came into conversation with those series in Houston. And so, yeah. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to raise a question? Oh, please.
I would like to know for the youth of cultures that read your books, your poetry, your stories, what is your intention? What do you want them to take away from it?
So I have a poem in here called Pozole that I like to read for youth whenever I'm asked to like speak for classes or schools. And I wrote that poem because growing up, my mom taught me how to make pozole, right? Which is if you don't know what it is, it's like a stew of some sort, usually made with hominy. And so, growing up, she would teach us that, our family's version of that. And then as I did more research, I found that pozole like predates colonization. It goes back to the Mexica people. And so to me, it seemed like, wow, like there's this lineage of this dish that has survived hundreds of years to get to me. And so I like to teach that to youth and tell that to youth to be like, they are the result of things beyond, you know, this building we're in. We're beyond the idea of this state, beyond the idea of this country, that they hold knowledge and being beyond all those containers. And so the more that they learn that, the more that they hold that knowledge, the more of a human being in conversation with all of human history, not just with one aspect of it. And they're all capable of that. All youth are capable of that, but they have to be taught. They have to be taught to think that way. They have to want to learn that history, to be proud. And I think people will never forget how proud you make me feel, right? And so for me, for the youth who engage with the work, what I want them to do is feel pride in a connection to human history that is beyond what is being told to them in our current moment.
You know, it would be a shame, since we're kind of all youths in a sense, to not hear that poem since you mentioned it now. So.
Which one? Pozole?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that. Sure. All right, here we go. Pozole. Examine handsome pork and note the vulnerabilities. The ears blush, the feet's foggy tendons, the ruby pierna's coat of grasa, a lightning of white cartilage. Strip the gummy fat and know what must be made bare. Place them all in la olla with streaks of cold tears, full of agua hirviendo. What is any sabor but a flesh boiled until clouds of lump float to the water's screaming surface, like souls to rapture? Skim the sputtering espuma, add ajos, onion, salt, bouillon, whatever may grace throat and stomach with wax-thick broth. A recipe is a litany of what has nourished the history of your becoming. Stir so nothing sinks and sticks. Open latas of white hominy. Hand wash them like spilled teeth, like nascent pearls, like orbs of wisdom from the dead. Continue boiling, continue waiting, continue living. Remove what can no longer give. Cebolla, garlic, doubt. Add bay leaf, add oregano, add what cannot be said. Taste the flavor. Taste what's been tasted before you. What has provided clarity beyond hunger. What has been prepared to the singing of those who could not hear your music. By those now in unwakeable sleep. Through your mother's hope. Through the instinct to reach across the time and say, you are here. Is it possible to ever be alone?
Yes, thank you. Audience, did anyone else have any follow-up after that? That was so shaky. But probably that's because I haven't had lunch, and now you started me. This is just a curiosity for me. I find that as an immigrant myself, and as someone who sees what happens over time, the first thing one kind of moves away from is the language, right? And sometimes for school or for work, one moves away from one's ethnic enclave, etc. And you have experience of that moving away in that same transformation. But food has a way of remaining. What other things have you found that even as you're growing into your own individual, you're still growing into your style of poetry, some things that have remained, some things that are transcend kind of the generations that you've been able to cling on to? It's a very large question, but I think it's because of the poem kind of bridge that there's some things that stretches, centuries almost.
Yeah. For me, I mean, there's always the human element of like emotion, right? Whether it be grief, or joy, or pride, or anger. And that's what I was finding throughout, again, like my research in these figures, but also like in my own family history, where if you study history, if you study yourself, there will be moments, again, where you'll have immense pride and joy of yourself, but there will be moments where you'll be like, why did I do that? Or how could this happen? And so I think you have to be ready to, when you look into a truth, there will, yeah, again, like there will be moments where you'll face something that you didn't think was imaginable, right? And so like when you look at past, kind of like our immediate past generations, you'll see the hardships they went through, and you get mad. You're like, why did they have to do that? And then it's kind of like, well, they did that so I didn't have to. And so like, you then start to find that joy and pride, but then also couple that with grief and anger. And so for me, studying and trying to make those connections throughout generations, it's that a lot of the lessons will stay the same. A lot of the lessons of like, when you're full of grief, what do you do? And you'll find that some people throughout history did not process that grief well. They didn't process that anger well. There are people who handled it better than we could ever imagine. And so what do you take from those two extremes, right? Where do you find yourself in between those extremes? And so like, do you lean into to anger and grief, or do you lean into the joy and pride, or do you mix them? Or, and that's kind of the beauty of history, is that you'll get those complex answers. But that's also the sadness of it, is when they take that information from you, you don't get that reference. So you're always constantly playing to those extremes. And generally for me, like when you deal with complex issues, you have to be able to think complexly, and you have to, because you're going to run into situations where the answer is not going to be easy. It's not going to be so simple. And so you have to be full of the knowledge that other people have gone through maybe similar situations, and be like, okay, that's where I find myself.
I like that you do not only celebrate the joys and achievements, because oftentimes I see it too when Asian American Pacific Islander Month or Black History Month, we say we have triumphed over these adversities, and now these are all the positive things. As though that is, we have to make up for it, right? We have to make up for it. And recently I heard this psychiatrist say something very interesting, because now this is like the third, maybe fourth time you mentioned it, that on the surface level, anger, but underneath deeper is grief, right? And sometimes it manifests as anger. And so these are very complex questions. And so I kind of want to, before we close, ask your final thoughts about Hispanic Heritage Month, and how all of these kind of very complex emotions are filtered through your lens, how you see them kind of now as your role. You're able to kind of see them from a kind of holistic point of view, from an overall point of view.
Yeah, I think right now in our current, American imagination, we are currently only seeing like the grief and anger, whether it be our own or from outside, right? And I think for me, obviously it's always more complex than that. Like every community has issues, every community has things to be proud of. And the sooner we reconcile and share those things with each other, the more we can be in conversation, the more we can talk to each other. But by only showing the negative, right, only showing the grief, only showing the horrors of it, that's all you're going to process. When it's more complex than that, it's like there's joys and there's contributions, there's beauty and there's art, and there's conversations and there's healing, and there's so many amazing things that I think the current American imagination doesn't want you to know. It wants to erase those aspects so it can tell a singular story. But even then, just because something is bad doesn't mean it's not human, right? And so ultimately, I think that's what art can do, is that it tells us that things are not alone. They are not in a silo. Things don't just happen because they just happen. They happen because it's a conversation with everything else in our society. And so as we go through Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx Heritage Month, we're going to start to see, again, like the complexity of those narratives. Unfortunately, it's contained to that one month, but now more than ever, we have to do it for each other. We have to do it with each other, whether it's AAPI month, whether it be African American History Month, whether it be Native American Heritage. We all have to learn and be cognizant of each other's struggles and victories, and also grief in defeat, because that is the story of America. Who is imparting the grief? Who is imparting those defeats, and why are we fighting? What is the struggle against ultimately? And the sooner we can have those conversations, the sooner we can be all proud together.
I think that was a very optimistic way of concluding your talk and your reading. Thank goodness for that. I have a way of ending on a somber note, but no, that was a very optimistic way. Reyes, I just want to thank you for this conversation, because we've worked together in various capacities, but we've never sat down to really mine some of the thoughts behind your poetry, and with such a lovely audience, and those over a live stream as well. And so I just want to conclude, of course, by thanking the Houston Poet Library, the staff of Stanaker Neighborhood Library for having us here, again, our lovely in-person audience as well as those over the stream, and of course to our Houston Poet Laureate, Reyes, who this will be the first of 4, possibly 5 events that he has today. So the fact that you joined us and shared some of your thoughts in this very intimate setting means a lot. And so we end with just gratitude. So thank you very much, and we hope that afterwards everyone comes up and thank Reyes as well. So, hand of applause.